Hello again everyone, I hope you're all keeping well. In this video I'll be speaking with you a little bit about Jordan Peterson, Dr. Jordan Peterson, and his rather hypocritical tweet that he put out there concerning Judge Kavanaugh. Now Justice Kavanaugh, he's been confirmed to the US Supreme Court, but Peterson tweeted, "If confirmed, Kavanaugh should step down." There's a few problems with that tweet and the subsequent tweets that he tweeted out. Such as the following, and his Twitter timeline's a bit of a mess because he then tried to put the focus onto other matters, and eventually the backlash to the original tweet was so strong that he had to actually address it. And so he said, I'm not certain that it is the right move, it's very complex, but he would have his name cleared and a figure who might be less divisive might be put forward. He then went on to say that might decrease residual alienation from the left and make things less polarized moving forward. Of course, that has to be balanced against handing any victory to the believe all accusers crowd. He further went on to say, I was thinking all this whole trying to plot out a strategy that would be least damaging on the whole. And I am not jumping up and down claiming to be correct. Thought is experiment, not reality. And finally, he said, I believed if confirmed, then Kavanaugh would be vindicated and could preserve his reputation. I understand the damage that has been done to him, perhaps better than most, but by withdrawing, he could effectively deprive his more radical opponents of their self-righteous moralism. This whole thing is just a mess, as I say. Oh no, wait, there's another tweet as well here where he says, as I said, this could be wrong. So he's taking this position at the very end, and he made these tweets over an entire day, incidentally. I should stress that. The original tweet, he did not want to redress that or come back to it and try and justify it. It was only after the backlash from that he then went on to attempt to clarify his position. But to me and to many others, it looks as if he was trying to backtrack from it, to walk back his original statement. We'll get into why all of this is just ridiculous and it is rather hypocritical. The original tweet first. Let me say something about that. When Dr. Peterson, according to his own words, was once accused of sexually inappropriate behavior, and that was shown to be a false allegation, did Dr. Peterson step down? Okay, did Dr. Peterson step down? No, he fought against that. All right? That's very important to keep in mind. So why is he telling, or why would he advise Kavanaugh to step down? I realize, of course, Kavanaugh probably would never read his Twitter timeline. I'm just pointing something out. So you're basically telling somebody to do as you say, not as you do, which goes against the grain of what he said in his 12 Rules for Life, where he talks about speaking the truth. Right? He talks about standing up with courage against the mob mentality. That single tweet flies in the face of it. So he is being, at best, unknowingly dishonest, unwittingly dishonest. Okay? That is not a good thing. There are serious problems with the subsequent tweets as well, where he talks about how somebody who is, how can I put this? Well, how did he put it? Someone who is less divisive being put forward in Kavanaugh's place. Now, the original tweet was tweeted out the day before Kavanaugh's confirmation. He had, of course, no way of knowing that Kavanaugh would be confirmed. But the fact of the matter is that if you look at this hard-fought battle, and believe me, right, like let me stake out my position on Kavanaugh as well, for those of you that are new to this video. In the previous video, I've already done that. But I'm no fan of Kavanaugh. I do not support Kavanaugh's positions on a myriad of things. Okay? Not least of which is the fact that he was a very good friend of George W. Bush. Okay? He also supported the idea of the Patriot Act, implementing the Patriot Act, the expansion of the surveillance state, the taking away of citizens' rights under the US Constitution. These are all matters of policy. Okay? But Peterson here is not opposing Kavanaugh's nomination. He's not even advising the Kavanaugh step down if he's confirmed, which he was. He's not advising that he step down because of policy matters. He's saying that Kavanaugh should step down because there's this outrage. There's this outrage machine that has flourished from the radical left in particular. Okay? That is what he's saying. And that doesn't make any sense, because that's an act of cowardice. Right? It's an act of cowardice to walk away and to accept defeat. Because what would happen if Kavanaugh did step down is that the radical far left, who created this massive, this huge smear campaign that's never been seen before, okay, created a series of false allegations. And isn't it curious, by the way, that the CNNs and these other media outlets that all supported or first reported these allegations that were nothing more than an attempt to smear a man's character. Isn't it funny that they're no longer talking about any of the allegations? How weird is that? What they've actually done is throw Dr. Ford under the bus, who was their most, according to them, most credible eyewitness and victim of Kavanaugh's behaviours. Right? You're not hearing any more about that. Isn't that weird? Because if they were truly interested in justice, and if the allegations held any water, any weight whatsoever, you'd never stop speaking about it. Okay? And there's no corroborating evidence, as I pointed out in the previous video. There's no corroborating evidence whatsoever for any of these accusations or allegations that were made. And that's a serious problem, because listen, either you believe in the rule of law and in due process and in the concept that one is innocent until they are proven guilty, or you don't. And this trial by press that was conducted by the radical left was a travesty. And it supports the concept of lawlessness. It goes with the idea of being guilty until you're proven innocent. Right? And what Dr. Peterson is doing, to get back to him, what he's doing with that single tweet, and particularly in saying that Kavanaugh should, using that word should, it's very authoritative, it's like, well, he should do this. Why? What moral justification would there be to step down in that event? Right? If he is innocent, if he's truly innocent of not having committed any crimes whatsoever, why would he step down? Stepping down would be an admission of guilt in the minds of the radical left. They'd seize upon that, and straight away you would have total chaos throughout the United States of America. Because the rule of law would go flying out the window. Okay? So why would Dr. Peterson put out this tweet? And again, Dr. Peterson has not only previously once been accused of sexually inappropriate behaviour himself, falsely accused, I should stress, but he's had all other types of smears against him, right? So Jordan Peterson has faced the type of smears where he's been called a Nazi, a bigot, a transphobe, possibly homophobic or whatever else. They've thrown everything at him, okay? So he's faced quite a few of these types of smear tactics in his own professional life, and he didn't step down after that had happened either, right? He didn't step. He got up and he fought against it. He spoke out against it. He rallied people to his cause. So, you've got to walk the walk if you're going to talk the talk. And if you do a particular thing or say a particular thing, then you've got to stick by that. You have to be consistent. There's no consistency in Professor Peterson's tweets regarding Kavanaugh at all. That's where the problem is. And people are rightly outraged about what has been tweeted from his account by him. Some people were even questioning whether his account had been hacked, because they couldn't believe that Jordan Peterson would do this. But you have to understand something about who Peterson is and the level of confusion in his own ideological positions. Okay? Folks wrongly keep assuming that Jordan Peterson is some kind of bastion of firm understanding. And he isn't. Okay? He's not. He is more confused about his political beliefs and views and opinions and thoughts than just about anyone else I've ever listened to. It's not that he's, a bad guy or something like that. Not at all. Many of the things that he has said or published or talked about make a whole lot of sense. But when it comes to the arena of politics, I've heard him spew utter nonsense from time to time, and I just find myself wondering why people are listening to him. And I think part of the reason has to do with the fact that he resonates particularly with young men. There's this demographic of young men who have grown up without fathers. So he almost represents this mythical pseudo-father figure. And he probably knows this, that it's a case of psychological transference almost. Folks are substituting their real fathers for Dr. Peterson. That's what's going on. And he's kind of, I don't want to say this in a demeaning sense, but he's almost leeching off that need, that emotional need that young men have. Okay? But again, there's more to this than just that. Okay, there's much more to it than that. The other point is that one of the tweets that I read out, he's talking about Kavanaugh stepping down, to get back to that. He's talking about that as if that would placate the radical left. Or that if that would somehow make them realise that they are not morally righteous in some sense. But that wouldn't work because they're not driven by morality, right? The small number of them on the fringes that are causing all the chaos, and I've already explained that the majority of people are, even on the left, are not nutcases. Okay, but the minority of people that are out there on the fringe of the left, those folks, they wouldn't happily accept anyone, saying, okay, well, you know what, for the good of the country, if Kavanaugh was to say, for the good of the country, I'm going to step down. Okay, they wouldn't accept that at all. They'd view it as their victory. And more than that, the point I was going to make is that they are ego-driven. They're not driven by morals, they're driven by their egos. Egos that are blatantly out of control. Okay, that's what's happening with them. So you cannot give them an inch because they will take a mile. This is the problem. They are unhinged. When faced with this type of mob mentality, one should never give in. In fact, Jordan Peterson himself said this about mob mentality. You should never give in to it. And for Kavanaugh to step down would be to give in to this sort of lynch mob, waving their pitchforks and saying, well, now, we're going to hang you. You don't do that. If you are in the moral right in terms of natural law, then you have no reason to fear standing against the brutality of such a mob, provided that you're there's no immediate danger to your life. You're not immediately in any danger. You should confront the mob. Okay, not in any sort of violent way, but verbally and in terms of your strength of character, you confront it. And that's exactly what Kavanaugh did. So, this is nonsensical advice. Now, Peterson claims that this was some sort of thought experiment, that original tweet of his. That doesn't make too much sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense to me, and why a lot of folks are looking at this and they are very outraged by Peterson's comment, is because the first comment, the first tweet was put out there on October the 5th. His clarifications didn't come until a day after, when the backlash was so massive that he absolutely then had to clarify. Right? And point out that it was a thought experiment. He didn't phrase it in such a way where he said, well, I'm going to conduct this experiment in my thinking and put this idea forward or something. Okay? He didn't buttress that statement with any sort of... And there's also the added problem, even if he was to make the argument, well, that's... Which he does, he makes the argument that that was supposed to be a thought experiment in essence. Or that all thought is ultimately an experiment or whatever. The problem with that notion is that the first tweet used the word should. Meaning that he was looking at it at the time that he tweeted that as that's the way things ought to occur. Okay, it goes back to Hume's Aesop problem, actually, philosophically, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that that was his ideal preferred outcome. That's what it's indicative of. Right? I don't know if I'm expressing this with total clarity, what I'm trying to get across here, but Peterson knew damn well what he was saying. And then he tried to walk back that original comment. Okay, and what it shows is that he is not in favor of the law, of justice. That, I think, is what is most damning about it. Because either you believe a person is innocent until proven guilty, or you buy into the idea that a person is guilty until they're proven innocent. That's the problem with the original tweet, that it reads literally like, and it's not a question of interpretation or whatever else, because one of the things that Jordan Peterson loves to do is to trot out this well-known line, it depends what you mean by ... Okay? The problem with that tweet, that statement that he put out there, is that it doesn't depend on what you mean, because it can only be interpreted in a finite number of ways, according to the rules of the English language. Okay? That's the fundamental problem with it. So, I don't think that Peterson actually knows where he falls inside the continuum of political discourse. I don't think he knows where he is on that at all. And I think what's happened is that the press floated him as this conservative, this right-winger, when in fact he is none of those. Because I don't know anyone on the right in any European country, in the UK, in the US, in Canada. I don't know anyone that would call themselves a right-winger or being on the right who would support the idea of guilty until proven innocent, or would support the idea. And I know that we can get into all these arguments, because he subsequently tweeted a day after that he does think that Kavanaugh's sort of innocent. That was the implication and so on. But that's a justification after the original tweet, you see. And the context of that original tweet, because it was a response to, what was his name, Weinstein, another fellow in the intellectual dark web. And again, as I say, that's a whole, the intellectual dark web, we'll get into that a little bit, I think, as well. But it was a response to Eric Weinstein, who, the Weinstein brothers. Let's the problem with Professor Weinstein, the other Weinstein, not the one he was responding to, but who's related to this Eric Weinstein, is that those guys... See, okay, let me put this as simply as I can. The folks inside the intellectual dark web all believe in the same ideology. The folks that were put into this basket, they all believe in the same ideology. Okay? And, or what you'll find is the majority do. And that ideology is socialism. Okay? That's the problem. They are either to a greater or lesser extent socialists. And so, as I said, the idea that Peterson is in any way, shape, or form on the right, it doesn't actually make sense. If you listen to the stuff that he's said, at best he's on the center left. Okay, at best he's on the center left. He's never discussed the real dangerous ideas that have been floated in any given arena of discourse. He's never done that. Another thing I'd like to raise as well, because this has been on my mind for months, I've privately spoken about it with a few people, when it comes to the intellectual dark web, right? Is that these are the folks that have been floating the idea that IQ is the be-all and end-all of human consciousness almost, or human achievement. To put it another way, these guys are social Darwinists. Okay, they're social Darwinists. That's the reason why they place such a high emphasis on IQ. And folks that purport to be on the right, even in the circles of the alt-right, seize upon the idea of IQ. And there's something I'd like to warn you all about very quickly as we talk here. And that is, see, the moment you hear anyone harping on about IQ, be very, very careful, because those folks are most likely, and I don't use this term lightly at all, but those folks are bound to be controlled opposition. Let me tell you a little bit about the IQ hoax. All right? Listen carefully. I'm not saying that differences in IQ don't exist. What I'm saying is, if there's an overemphasis in the discourse of anyone, right, when someone is writing about or talking about this subject area, if there's an overemphasis on IQ, you'd better be damn careful. All right? And here's the reason behind it. First of all, you have to grasp the fact that wisdom is not the same as intelligence, and intelligence is not the same as intellect. Okay? A society can be wise without necessarily having the most intellectual people in it. And folks might look at me strange as I say this, but you need only look through history to see that. The reason for that is because high IQ, right, or great intelligence, or great intellect, that is a blip which occurs in the bell curve. Okay, it's the extreme ends. It's at the extreme ends of a Gaussian bell curve in terms of distribution of IQ. So there's a limited number of people that have exceptionally high IQs. Most people fall somewhere in the middle of it all. All right? And you might say, what's that got to do with anything? You know, what does it have to do with the price of potatoes? Pay attention. So, the argument that's made by people, it's a pseudoscientific argument, by the way. The argument that's made by folks who are in support of the idea of IQ driving everything and being synonymous with wisdom, they don't outright or explicitly make that argument, but they implicitly, it's there, you know, in the background. The reason they do that is, well, we'll get to the reason, but how can I put this in a way that folks will understand? Because I think you guys out there will understand this. That's why I'm talking about it. Okay? So, if you say that society's development is down to intellect alone, you're making a massive mistake, because the advancements in civilization aren't brought about in a vacuum by high IQ people. Okay, this is the fundamental problem with any argument that centers solely around IQ, is that high IQ alone achieves nothing. There are plenty of bums out there with all kinds of degrees coming out their ears. Okay, all kinds of PhDs and whatever else, and they can't do anything with their lives. They don't even know how to tie their shoelaces together. Okay, this is the thing. And the erroneous argument that's made is those are the folks that drove civilization forward, all the high IQ people. That's bollocks. That's patently a falsehood. And the reason it can be shown to be a falsehood is because civilizations advance due to the sociological phenomenon that are present within any given society. For example, and you'll understand as I explain this a little. So, if you have stable families, are those stable families going to produce children that are industrious? Typically, the answer is yes. Are those families going to produce children that want to achieve something? Most likely, yes. Similarly with creativity, creativity cannot be expressed inside an environment in which it is not allowed to prosper. Okay? And sometimes it takes adverse events to help it along in a strange sort of way. Okay? So it's not a straightforward thing. It's not as straightforward as saying, that IQ is the absolute predictor of success. It isn't. It just happens to be mixed in with the myriad of everything else that goes on sociologically. And those blips can help, provided that they are nurtured in the correct ways. But they aren't quite as important as these folks make out. Okay? And the intellectual dark web, the folks that are a part of it, they want to stress that IQ is the be-all and end-all. And there's other people out there that do the same thing. And those are the people that are dangerous, because what is the reason why they do this? This is what I'm going to come to now. So, does the distribution curve for IQ, let's say, okay, does that help societies that are somewhere in the median, okay, somewhere in the middle of that distribution curve? Does it help them at all? No, it provides a deterministic worldview in which those people think that they can never do anything, that they are worthless, that they can provide no value to a society. And one of the reasons why there's such a focus on race and IQ, okay, one of the reasons why that focus exists isn't to help the argument for people that are on the far right, as it's termed. That argument doesn't help them in the truest sense. Okay, it really doesn't. Because where Europeans fall in that distribution curve is very interesting. Because in terms of the pecking order, according to the results of IQ tests by society, which is a ludicrous thing to do, but they do it anyway, and then they pass it off as science. In terms of that, where do ethnically European folks fall in that distribution? Are they at the top of the pecking order? No. No, they're not. And what do you find that is being advocated for? I'm trying to make this easy for you, right? To help you understand what is being advocated for when these people that have such a focus on IQ, what are they saying? What are the kinds of things that they're saying? Typically, they say something along the lines of, well, black people fall here on the distribution curve, say in terms of ethnic folks who are ethnically sub-Saharan African or whatever else, right? Then you've got a distribution here of people that are Europeans, and they're kind of in the middle of that curve. And then you've got Ashkenazi Jews, right, who are very, very high up in terms of their IQ. And then you've got the Asians, that is to say the Chinese and the Japanese and so on. But it's an erroneous argument, right? And they never advocate. See, these folks that are pandering to this argument about high IQ, they never, ever, ever talk about the Chinese being superior in IQ and deserving of this, that, and the other, and deserving their positions in society or whatever else. No. They talk about something else entirely, which is to do with how Ashkenazi Jews, who are disproportionately represented in the areas of media, finance, that is to say banking, politics, the creative arts, Hollywood. Okay? That's what they talk about, because you can't ignore that fact, right? That they are disproportionately represented in all of these areas. So how do you explain that? One way to explain it then is through this deterministic worldview. Are you starting to understand yet? Through this deterministic worldview that states that, well, you know, they were born with this ability. And so because it's a meritocracy in these countries in the West, they managed to make it to the top of the food chain. Well, if that's the case, here's my question. Are the Japanese more intelligent or less intelligent than Ashkenazi Jews? Okay, there's my ultimate question. They're more intelligent. Are the Chinese less intelligent or more intelligent than Ashkenazi Jews? So the question has to become, shouldn't they be more represented in all of these mediums then? Do you see what I'm saying? So this is why this dishonesty exists inside the intellectual dark web, is to excuse away, to wave away this rather skewed reality. It's nothing to do with, you know, because they don't allow you to be happy if you're an ethnic European with your IQ. That's seen as white supremacy. Okay, so be very, very careful of folks that trot out this IQ garbage. Because this is what they're all about. And I know I struggle to kind of get there with you guys to explain it to you, but it's a hard subject to broach because most folks don't really want to look at it. They're too wrapped up because the alt-right immediately jumped onto this bandwagon of, oh, you know, race and IQ, and we're just being race realists. Little realizing that the people that were floating the idea, the people that were promoting the idea, were actually contributing to the societal problems. Okay? They're not there to solve the problems or to help your cause or whatever else. They're going to be part of the destruction of your cause. Right? But the point I'm making here is that once, getting back to Jordan Peterson, I don't want to get too distracted from the main point. Once Jordan Peterson had decided to be part of this intellectual dark web of whatever, you know, this thing, this club almost, that's when he started to get persuaded to align more with their points of view. It's also part of the same reason why the campaign against anti-Semitism also backed Jordan Peterson. Okay? That group, by the way, is really, really shady. Like, properly so. In that they're so sketchy that they actually attempted to shut down the free speech of a number of centrists inside the UK. They're also one of the groups that went out of their way to smear the UK Labour Party, and I'm no fan of the Labour Party or Jeremy Corbyn here. Maybe American folks don't know who that is. But those folks, that is to say the CAA, went out of their way to smear Corbyn, to smear members of the Labour Party. Okay, that wasn't an accident that happened. So there's a lot more to this than people realize. That's my point. And when you see Jordan Peterson doing these kind of things or saying these kind of things, it's going to happen more and more, because what he's actually going to try and do is a A/B test. In terms of psychology and persuasion, all right, let me tell you how this works a little bit. Every major corporation that has something to sell to you performs A/B testing, okay? They give you an extreme idea, okay, which you might love or hate, and they know that it's going to generate extreme emotions. Then they propose a softer position, okay? Then, little by little, they climb to a median point between those two positions that they've already set out. And that's how they get people to agree with going in a particular direction, buying a particular product, whatever else it may be. Now, these ideas, I think, probably were best used by people like Bernays, also by folks like Gustave Le Bon. And controlling the masses, if you know what you're doing, is not a tough thing to do. And this is what they're all about. You know, people that are part of this intellectual dark web, including Jordan Peterson, right? He stakes out these positions, and then, you know, he takes a slightly softer stance to move the bulk of his audience towards his position. It's a very, very interesting tactic. It can work, but I think in this case he botched it just a little because he wasn't expecting quite the backlash that he got. Another thing about Jordan Peterson that should make people a little bit uncomfortable is the fact that Peterson worked on a UN high-level panel on sustainable development. And he edited a document that was titled "A New Global Partnership, Eradicate Poverty and Transform Economies Through Sustainable Development." If you know anything about the UN Sustainable Development Programme and Agenda 2030 and so on, these are all, they sound lovely. They sound absolutely marvelous as ideas. They're very appealing. But behind them, in terms of the construction of smart cities, and in terms of herding people like cattle into tiny enclosures, if you really understood what the heck that was about, and a lot of folks do, you realize very quickly it's not something that is in the interest of the mass public. But they've got to sell it somehow, right? And Peterson, being a psychologist, is one of the people who can persuade people very well. In fact, he's demonstrated this because the moment he came on the scene, he experienced this meteoric rise because he possessed the correct skills to be able to do that. To convince and persuade and cajole, right? But do it all nicely. You know? Anyway, I don't want to drone on too long here about too much, but I think people would be wise to be careful of holding anyone up as any kind of savior, because to me, it seems like Peterson's ego has gone to his head. The beckoning of the intellectual dark web was too much for him to resist, and that ultimately he's something of a sellout. And that's a very sad thing, because he could have been a beacon of truth. He could have been a beacon of right moral thinking, almost, you know. But he's too confused a person in terms of where he stands on anything. And he always obfuscates, and, you know, you'll notice this in his public speeches and so on. He's not very clear about anything. And people like that who can't stake out their positions well, those are folks to be wary of. You know, he's done it in terms of religion and whatnot as well. You know, people have asked him, "Do you believe in God?" And he says, "Well, it depends on what you mean by God." If somebody asks me, okay, and people have asked me, so if someone asks me, do you believe in God? I say yes. Okay, there's no, well, it depends what you mean by it. Yes, there are nuanced arguments within that answer, of course. If I say yes, that doesn't really explain much to you if you want to understand why I might believe. Okay? But the expounding on an answer is different from obfuscating and evading answering the question at all. You know, and Peterson does this, and he did the same thing on a myriad of other questions. So this is why I say, you know, be cautious of folks that are floated by the media, especially as saviors. I've always said this to people. Okay, don't hero worship anyone. Like I said, none of this makes Jordan Peterson an evil man. He's just a flawed human being, that's all. He's got a lot of good ideas that are very useful, and I have immense respect for that. I respect him as a great teacher and a professor to his students as well. But there are areas in which he is not an expert, yet he pretends to be. And so we should be careful of that, right? And it doesn't mean that a person has to be a complete expert on any given subject which they wish to talk about, necessarily. But they do have to have some understanding of it, or an in-depth understanding, before they speak on it, you know? And with Peterson, I tend to find with him that there is a lack of that. So, you know, like I said, I mean, from a personal point of view, Dr. Peterson was instrumental. Okay, let me say this in closing. In case anyone thinks this is just an anti-JBP rant or something, right? This is not what this is at all. Dr. Peterson was instrumental in my own development to this point. Okay, that's something I have to say. If it wasn't for him, I would never have found the confidence and the necessary fortitude in my character to even be on YouTube, for example, or to achieve or accomplish many of the things that I have done since I came across his work. So, from a personal point of view, you know, it was very helpful. It was remarkably helpful. But in terms of public discourse and politics and even matters of law, I do think that when anyone makes any type of mistake or an error in judgment, then we have to be wise enough to call them out on it, no matter who they are. Even if they're a surrogate father figure, as Peterson is for many men. You know? As I say, though, I'll leave it there. I would love to hear your thoughts on this matter. And I look forward to speaking with you all again. Take good care of yourselves, and God bless all of you.